Many thanks for staying with us. This is still Report Desk Africa, the program where we discuss several hot-button issues, and one of which is the budget allocation in Nigeria. Now, the federal government has set aside 1 billion naira to the presidency for sitting allowance and welfare packages. A breakdown of the budget shows that the presidency will get 98.5 billion naira for personnel costs. The budget also revealed that the offices of the president and the vice president, including the president's chief of staff, getting 21 billion naira from the 2024 budget. The country's 2024 budget shows that the figure allocated for the office of the chief of staff is a 97.5% increase from the 517.95 million naira in 2023.
All right, now this is quite an escalated budget, like some have come to call it. And, well, we have to bring in someone who is an expert when it comes to figures and budgets to discuss this matter with us. Now, joining us on the show to shed more light on this issue is Samuel Oyekanmi, who's a research analyst with Nairametrics. Samuel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. Good afternoon.
All right, thank you, Samuel. Now, just so that people don't get frightened by these figures that we've been calling with so many zeros at the back, is why we have you in here. Now, first of all, Samuel, let's do, excuse me. Now, let me ask you, what do you think that this, or rather, do you think that this particular budget is quite an ambitious budget? And do you think that the country can actually fund this budget, considering the exchange rate currently and the price of crude oil?
Well, 27 trillion naira. As expected, we expected, of course, that it's going to be a little bit higher than the previous year. But again, I try as much as possible, because you need to understand that a significant portion of this budget is also going to be, a number of this funds is going to be going outside in terms of servicing, and then in terms of infrastructural constructions and whatnot. So you need to also bring the effect of exchange rates into that calculation. By the time you try to convert that based on the current exchange rate, you realize that the budget has not really increased significantly as you would have expected, or as you would have thought it would. And then considering the population growth, if you do that calculation per capita, you realize that by individual, over 220 million people is really not so much. But then back again to the fiscal environment, you understand that the government is trying to do better by more or less normalizing our fiscal environment, increasing tax revenue as much as possible, and then block those bottlenecks and loopholes in the fiscal system. If that happens, yes, the government might still be able to, of course, deliver on their mandate to spend 27 trillion. Of course, a huge part of that money is still expected to be covered through some form of loan arrangement. But of course, I believe it is not too ambitious considering where we are coming from. It's really not so much higher.
That notwithstanding, Samuel, let's talk about how exorbitant the cost of governance is in Nigeria. Now, we do understand that some of the budget for 2024 is going into, covering debts, it's going into investments and stuff like that. But our major focus is the amount of money allocated to the office of the president and the office of the vice president. And that brings me to how much or how costly governance is in Nigeria. Now, the 21 billion naira, for example, allocated for the office of the chief of staff is a 97.5% increase from 517.95 million as of 2023. Going into 2024, it's going to be 97.5% difference. Why are we seeing that huge disparity between 2023 and 2024? Bearing in mind the fact that most of the time, these things that, these prices that we hear are usually not accounted for. For example, the last time we heard that they were getting some exotic cars, which is not a bad idea, but they could not defend it. One of the reasons that we heard was there was bad road. And that will bring the question, why not fix the road and use the cars you have? Why do you have to get new cars that suits the bad road? So these are the disparities that we're seeing, in Nigeria that is making people question how much money the presidency is spending. So why that high?
Well, of course, one of the things that we've said, or a number of people have said over the years, and for Nigerian government, is the fact that we spend frivolously, unaccounted for, and I think that's a major problem, because again, you look at the breakdown of the budget, you see the amount of money that goes into recurrent expenditure, gulping as much as 60%. And then you ask yourself, what exactly are we spending on in this recurring expenditure? And then you start seeing things about the allocation for sitting allowances for the president, vice president, chief of staff, and a host of many other people in government offices. And I think that's one of the major problems that we're facing in Nigeria. You talked about the buying of cars and bad roads. It was really everywhere. And it is really not justified. I don't think it is sane in any climb, for the lack of a better word, to say that you want to buy cars because your roads are bad rather than fixing the road. It's just quite unfortunate, the fact that many people get into power and then still keep repeating the same thing as the previous administration keep doing. So it's almost like we are in a circle, spiraling, doing the same thing. Because if you're coming into the government and you want to try to rectify or normalize some things, normalize the fiscal environment, it is not just the revenue generating that is important. Expenditure is also equally important. Areas whereby they're not so necessary to spend on, I think it's quite important that you also close those gaps. Sitting allowances, the amount of money that you allocate to government offices, either in the legislative or in the executive arm of government, number of stories around ghost workers in the federal parastatals, and a host of many other things happening over there. I think those are areas that every serious-minded government must try to curb if you indeed want to solve our fiscal problem. If not, we'll keep finding ourselves borrowing year in, year out, and having a debt service to revenue ratios of around 100%. And that's not going to do anyone any good, because at the end of the day, you are just borrowing to service your previous debt, and that's not helping the economy.
Truly not helping the economy. And as a matter of fact, this just takes me to my next question. Although this will be putting you on the spot now to hear what you have to say. Borrowing to service debts, putting monies where we do not see as priority. Would you, in your own words, say that this is a case of misplaced priority for the federal government, especially if some of the sectors of the economy are not exactly getting the appropriate budgetary allocation? Largely between last year and this year, as a matter of fact, in the past few years, we've seen strikes with education. We've seen strikes in healthcare. We've seen strikes in labor union and some of that deep sectors of of the country and of the economy. But now we're seeing that the majority of this budget is going into servicing government and governance. So in your own words, again, this is me putting you on the spot. Would you say that this is misplaced priority by our government, or do we think that there's something they see or they know that we do not see and we do not know?
I'm going to answer that question from two sides, right? Because, of course, this is you putting me on the spot. And I'm going to look at it as an analyst and then as an individual. As a Nigerian, looking at the current economic doldrums that we face, every Nigerian is hit with a number of things. For at least the top on everyone's mind is the high cost of goods and services in the country, and that's caused by some of the policies that the new government has brought in place, which has been lauded by analysts. But as a Nigerian who wants to believe in these policies, but at the end of the day, say that the government is also not paying a part of that sacrifice by avoiding some of these unnecessary things, in our own opinion, it does not really speak so well about our social trust and security. So yeah, that's from an average Nigerian's point of view. And an analyst or anyone would also say that it is misplaced priority. But however, whatever it is that it might be, the reality is that we need to start paying attention to some critical sectors of the Nigerian economy that is expected to spur growth. I would also laud the government. In the last 2 years, we've seen relatively some increase in budgetary allocation to some critical sectors. I think this one is around 5% of the budget to the educational sector, and last year was a little bit around over 5%. I think, and 2 years ago it was less than 4%. So I think we've seen some level of growth in that region, but is it really enough? Because if you compare that with UNESCO standard and then the World Health Organization standard, we're still below par. We still need to do more, and what we just need to do is take away those fundings that have been allocated to areas of the economy that are not really important, especially a lot of bottlenecks inside that recurring expenditure, and try to put these funds into critical sectors that will pay for themselves. One of it, we're having serious migration, the Japa wave, over the last 2-3 years. A number of health agencies and health organizations in Nigeria have said that we've lost a number of health practitioners in Nigeria to the Japa syndrome. Corporate businesses, banks, manufacturing firms have also lost a number of their experts and professionals to this same Japa wave. And a number of those things as a result of the development, the living standard in Nigeria, which I think the government can do a lot to help solve. But if you're not doing that, if you keep spending money on the things that we do not see as important, you are just telling us that the government do not have our backs. And then the Nigerian youth want to jump on the next train that leaves the country. And that's just where we are.
All right, Samuel, finally, I mean, it's one thing for a country to, to have a lot of debt burden and, trying to ease the burden, they resort to borrowing money from international bodies and other countries. But it's another thing to not have enough money, refuse to be frugal with spending, and at the same time still resort to borrowing, right? And it's looking like that's the path that Nigeria is stowing. Now, a lot of people have described this as pouring water into a basket because we have refused to use our own money, judiciously, just like Bernard has said, misplacement of priority, prioritizing the things that we should be minoring on and majoring on the things that, minoring on the things that we should be majoring on. And because of that, we keep running into this debt, right? And we keep trying to borrow year on year. So there's a borrowing plan of $8.6 billion, for example, towards the social economic development of the country. If we still refuse to spend the money that we have wisely, what is the implication of continuous borrowing and continuous mismanagement of these funds on the country if care is not taken?
Well, so what we are currently going through now is as a result of accumulated debts before now. And currently we've seen a number of those loans still happening. I think Minister of Finance some months back, it was last month, announced that they're going to securitize dividends, gas dividends for a couple of years, which is expected to give us about 7 billion USD, and then another 3 billion USD, and that's to solve some temporary problems in the FX market. And that means that we are already trading our future earnings just because we want to solve problems now, and that's just one side. Aside that, we also have other plans of acquiring more loans externally. Domestic debt programs are still ongoing in form of bond issuances and treasury bills. And all this is just going to keep putting pressure on the future generation. That's one at the very least. And two is that future earnings that we're going to make, because in the future, if you say you are able to expand the tax bracket, you're able to generate more revenue, able to produce more crude oil and whatnot, and your revenues are going up because you have such a huge debt burden which you have to service. At the end of the day, you still find yourself making the revenue, and at the end of the day, still spending almost all on debt servicing without having additional value on the economy in terms of capital expenditure and investment in constructions, infrastructures, and whatnot. And I think that's not going to do anyone any good. In the long run, what it's going to mean is that foreign investors will not see the economy as being serious. They won't want to put their money in such an economy. And that is also not good, even for the FX market, because you need FDIs to keep coming in if you want your FX market to be liquid. You also want some level of development in critical sectors of the economy. If these FDIs are not coming in, you won't have as much development and growth in those sectors. Unemployment will still remain relatively constant because if new money is not coming in, there's no development, there's no expansion plan. Unemployment, effect that could bring some problems for the future generations, because it means that future earnings would be used to pay debts that have been acquired by previous administration. And I don't think anyone wants that.
Okay, definitely. We don't want that. Thank you very much, Samuel Oyekanmi. Samuel, before you go on a very light note and still putting you on the spot one final time, we heard that, going to the climate summit in Dubai, COP28, the Nigerian contingency, or the contingents were about 1,411. And for COP29, I'm just thinking, do you think there's any part of the budget that covers more people go for COP29? You don't have to answer that. It's a rhetorical question. You don't have to
Yeah,
answer.
to be honest, I don't know because there are just a number of things happening in Nigeria. But yeah, I really have no idea.
Honestly. Anyway, thank you so much, Samuel Oyekanmi, research analyst with Nairametrics. Thank you so much for sharing your views on this topic with us.
Thank you.
Anyways, well, blessings. I say quite an interesting one of the budget, particularly the amount of money being spent for the president, the vice president, and chief of staff. Yeah. I saw one part where somebody was lamenting about it in the office this morning about the amount spent for refreshment or snacks or something like that, and it was reaching a ridiculous amount. I can't exactly remember
honestly,
the number,
at this
but
point,
the amount was quite
I'm not even surprised anymore. I just got to learn that every year they change furniture.
They change furniture. They change kitchen utensils.
It's ridiculous.
So you want to ask what happened to the last set of cutlery that were in the kitchen?
I mean, and these things are not cheap, you know? It's like my friend would say, it's ludicrous. A lot of times we see these things happening and it's like, it's more embarrassing as a country because you know that people know that these things are wrong. But because there's no accountability whatsoever, and that's why something happened in South Africa some time ago, and I'm like, that's good, because now they're taking account. I think someone mismanaged fund, and it was made to account for it. We should stop all these snakes swallowed, cockroach ate, someone fainting when they ask you how you spent money. You know, it's just, I think we need to prioritize accountability. When we do that, then people would sit up.
Definitely, we need to prioritize accountability. Now, we'll be going on a very quick break, and when we come back, we're still talking money and talking finance, but now we're looking at loan apps. If you're a Nigerian, if you're in Nigeria, you probably would have received some funny text messages stating that somebody you know,
I think
or
every
possibly
Nigerian
may not even know, is owing a certain amount of money, and that if this person is not publicized or if the person is not brought forward, you will be held accountable. We're going to be talking about that when we come back on the second half of Report Desk Africa. Do stay with us.